Today's Korean news of InGilBang. The People's Power will hold a standing national committee on the 5th to convert the current system, in which floor leader Kwon Song-dong acts on behalf of party leader Lee Jun-sok, into an emergency response committee system. According to the Constitution of the People's Power, the Standing National Assembly of the National Assembly, chairpersons of city and provincial parties belonging to the party, members of the National Assembly nominated by the General Assembly of Members of the National Assembly, members of women, youth, college students, and persons with disabilities appointed by the party representative, and representatives of city and provincial councils belonging to the party gather together. The committee has the power to interpret the party constitution and bylaws. The Standing National Committee to be held this morning will examine whether the situation in which party chairman Lee Jun-sok's duties has been suspended and the recent resignation of the three top members of the leadership led by floor leader Kwon Song-dong corresponds to an emergency situation that can constitute an emergency response committee. To interpret the vote. Power of the People. Article 96 of the party constitution stipulates that in the event of an emergency situation in the party, such as the vacancy of the party representative or the loss of the functions of the Supreme Council, an emergency response committee may be established for stable party operation and resolution of the emergency situation. Incumbent lawmakers belonging to the People's Power held a general meeting of the National Assembly on the 1st and agreed that the current situation corresponds to an emergency situation. However, only when the Standing National Committee agrees to this interpretation can the procedure for the establishment of the Extraordinary Committee begin. This is because only the Standing National Committee has the authority to interpret the Constitution and bylaws. At the Standing National Committee on the same day, it is expected that the amendment of the party constitution to give acting party representative Kwon Song-dong the right to appoint the non-chairman will also be discussed. According to the current party constitution, the chairman of the Emergency Response Committee is appointed by the party representative or acting representative of the party with the consent of the National Committee, which consists of the highest members of the People's Power, members of the National Assembly, city and provincial governors, representative members of city and provincial councils, and standing advisors. If acting party chairman Kwon, the acting office, appoints the non-chairman, there may be controversy that the procedure is flawed. If the Standing National Committee recognizes the current situation as an emergency, the National Committee will hold a meeting on the 9th to first deal with the amendment to the party constitution that grants acting party representative Kwon Song-dong the right to appoint an emergency response chairperson, followed by a motion to appoint the emergency response chairperson. Acting Kwon then appoints the Emergency Response Committee chairperson, and the Emergency Response Committee chairperson reopens the Standing National Committee and appoints Emergency Response Committee members with consent. The chairman of the Emergency Response Committee and members of the Emergency Response Committee will take the place of the existing party leader and supreme member until a new party leader and supreme member are elected at a national convention. It is impossible for party leader Lee Jun-sok to return. Conversely, if the agenda is rejected at any one stage of this procedure, the transition to the Emergency Response Committee system becomes impossible. Ahead of the 30th anniversary of diplomatic ties between Korea and China, Minister of Foreign Affairs Park Jin will visit China on the 8th for 3 days and 2 nights. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs released data on the 5th and announced that Minister Park will visit China from the 8th to the 10th at the invitation of Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and hold a meeting with Minister Wang in Qingdao, Shandong Province, with Minister Wang. Since the establishment of diplomatic ties in 1992, Qingdao has served as a bridgehead for Korean small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, to advance into China. A meeting between Minister Park and Director Wang is scheduled to take place on the 9th. The two ministers plan to discuss issues of mutual interest, such as Korea-China relations, the Korean Peninsula and regional and international issues, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said. The two ministers had their first face-to-face meeting on the 7th of last month in Bali, Indonesia, on the occasion of a meeting of 20 major countries. Afterwards, they met several times at ASEAN-related foreign ministers' meetings, including the ASEAN Regional Forum held in Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia, on the 4th and 5th. Minister Park's visit to China is the first visit of a high-ranking person since the inauguration of the Yoon Suk-yeol government, and is expected to discuss in depth the situation on the Korean Peninsula and the region, including the North Korean nuclear issue and Korea-China relations, which will mark the 30th anniversary of diplomatic ties on the 24th. In particular, the Yoon Suk-yeol administration has been emphasizing the US-oriented diplomacy and relations with China based on mutual respect since its inception, so it is expected to serve as an important opportunity to determine the future of bilateral relations. Earlier, at the first face-to-face meeting held in Bali on the 7th of last month, Wang said, China should remember the initial intention of establishing diplomatic ties with the ROC side, focus on mutual benefit and cooperation, eliminate interference from inside and outside, and promote healthy and stable relations between the two countries. We hope to develop it into. The issues of this meeting are grouped into three main points. First, it is an economic security issue, such as South Korea's participation in the so-called Chip 4, a semiconductor supply chain partnership led by the United States. The Chinese side has been wary of the possibility of establishing a global supply chain that excludes China, which is being pursued by the US, including semiconductors, saying, "I want Korea to judge based on the national interest." Second, the issue is related to the USFK THAAD high-altitude missile defense system. Since last month, Chinese state-run media have been emphasizing the additional deployment of THAAD, the so-called $3 policy announced by the Moon Jae-in administration, participation in the US-led missile defense, and the maintenance of the South Korea-US-Japan military alliance. In fact, Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Zhao Jian at a regular press conference on the 27th of last month expressed this as a debt of the past, and said, "No matter what country, who is in power, and what political demand there is, maintaining the basic continuity of foreign policy is essential. It is respect for history and self-respect, and it is the right thing to do in communication between neighbors." Third, the situation on the Korean peninsula and surrounding areas. Minister Park is expected to explain the Yoon Suk-yeol administration's North Korea policy, the so-called Bold Plan, and ask for cooperation from the Chinese side. In particular, it is expected that China will ask for a constructive role so that North Korea can stop nuclear and missile provocations, including the 7th nuclear test, which is said to have already been prepared. On the other hand, the Chinese side has been emphasizing that there was no corresponding measure to North Korea's denuclearization measures and failed to resolve North Korea's reasonable security concerns. In other words, he indirectly stated that he could not assume all responsibility for North Korea's nuclear and missile provocations. There is also a possibility that discussions will take place on the situation in Northeast Asia, which is culminating in China's unprecedentedly strong military response after U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. At a time when China is shifting all responsibility to the United States, it is of interest to see what kind of response the Yoon Suk-yeol administration, which aims to become a global backbone with value diplomacy at the forefront, will respond. China launched the strongest military offensive since the Taiwan crisis in 1995-96 in protest against House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan to contain China. China has announced that it will mobilize the People's Liberation Army to conduct siege-type military exercises, including live ammunition, around the Taiwan Strait from the 4th to the 7th. According to foreign media, 22 Chinese military aircraft actually crossed the midline on the 4th and returned. Also, from 1:56 p.m. to 4 p.m. on the same day, 11 Dongfeng-based ballistic missiles were fired in the waters surrounding northern, southern, and eastern Taiwan. There was also a long-range precision strike drill on the same day, but China did not mention it in the announcement on the 5th. Taiwan's Ministry of Defense said on the 5th that 68 Chinese military aircraft and 13 naval warships conducted exercises in the Taiwan Strait, some of which deliberately crossed the unofficial buffer zone of both sides known as the Middle Line. Taiwan's defense ministry said in a statement on the same day that it accused the Chinese military of seriously damaging the status quo and encroaching on Taiwan's waters and airspace, and said in response, "We responded using warning broadcasts and fighters, ships, and ground missiles." China also confirmed that on the second day of the military exercise announced in the Taiwan Strait, air and sea combat exercises were conducted. Japan's Kyodo News and NHK also reported that 5 out of 11 ballistic missiles launched by China on the 4th fell inside Japan's EEZ, and the Japanese government strongly protested to China. On the same day, Japanese Defense Minister Nobuo Kishi said, "This is a serious issue related to Japan's security and public safety. I strongly criticize it," he said. This is the first time that a Chinese ballistic missile has landed inside the EEZ set by Japan. Military experts evaluated that China's offensive in the Taiwan Strait was a sign of China's transition of the offensive from the gray zone strategy to the black and white zone dynamics, and it was linked to the Ukraine war, and the situation was serious. In particular, China's offensive this time showed its will to expand the front line to Japan, and the possibility of an accidental collision is inherent, and the seriousness of the situation is high. At the time of the Taiwan crisis in 1996, China militarily coerced the Taiwanese government's pro-U.S. actions through actual firing exercises such as missiles and large-scale deployment of troops in the Taiwan Strait. At that time, when the U.S. responded hard by sending large-scale military forces, such as an airstrike group, to the Taiwan Strait, China was immediately humiliated to halt military action and withdraw. This time, the US is taking strong countermeasures, such as deploying aircraft carriers, but unlike in 1996, China launched a high-intensity offensive such as launching a missile over Taiwan, attempting to manifest itself as a different power from the 1990s in terms of exploiting a great power. That can be seen as China has not crossed the so-called red line while adopting a gray zone strategy that undermines its opponent's interests in the long term in the South China Sea. However, for Taiwan, it is interpreted that the black and white dynamics is being operated in order to adhere to the principle of one country, two systems. In other words, it is analyzed that Taiwan is functioning as a proxy war zone with the highest possibility of conflict with the United States because it is defined as an area that China must protect even if it crosses the red line. As South Korea is an ally with the United States and China is a geopolitical neighbor, the situation should be closely monitored while clearly recognizing the reality that the Taiwan issue cannot be dismissed as someone else's business. Taiwan's Ministry of Defense said on the night of the 5th that it had chased away 7 unmanned aerial vehicles flying over Jinmen Island and an unidentified plane over the Matsu Islands. Citing Taiwan's Ministry of Defense, Reuters reported that the Taiwanese military used flares to warn them and maintained high vigilance in both areas. After U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, China's siege of Taiwan armed protests have continued, and Chinese military drones have been appearing one after another over Jinmen Island and the Matsu Islands. Although Jinmen Island is only 3.2 kilometers away from Xiamen City, Fujian Province, China, Taiwan continues to effectively control it even after the Civil War ended in 1949. The Matsu Archipelago, like Jinmen Island, is also far from Taiwan's main island and is Taiwan's public front line very close to the coast of Fujian Province. Among the Matsu Archipelago, Dongdaedo is 16 kilometers away from Fuzhou City, Fujian Province. Taiwan's Ministry of Defense announced on the night of the 3rd that it had warned and evacuated the Chinese military drone flying over Jinmen Island. It has been a while since Chairman Pelosi left for Korea after completing his visit to Taiwan. According to the South China Morning Post in Hong Kong, no Chinese military aircraft have flown over Jinmen Island since the 1950s, when the first and second crises in the Taiwan Strait occurred. On the other hand, it is known that drones and airplanes believed to belong to the Chinese military often appear over the Matsu Islands. As China's siege of Taiwan military exercise enters the 3rd day, trade ships are changing routes one after another. According to Reuters on the 5th, China started a 4-day military exercise in the Taiwan Strait from the 4th in protest of U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. Is choosing a different route. An official from the Baltic Sea International Shipping Association said, some ships have already taken precautions and are sailing east of Taiwan instead of going through the Taiwan Strait. The Taiwan Strait is a sea route of about 500 kilometers long and 150 to 200 kilometers wide, located between China and Taiwan, and major sea routes from East Asia to the United States and Europe are concentrated. However, as China crossed the midline of the Taiwan Strait, which is considered to be the de facto boundary line in this exercise, concerns of ships are growing. Owners of large tankers are raising the level of security and bypassing ships, said an official from the shipping brokerage company Prima. Some point out that the problem could become even more serious in the future, especially given the world's record inflation as the COVID-19 lockdown took a toll on supply chains this year. With global trade still recovering from the aftermath of the pandemic, even a slight delay in shipping could affect trade. An official from Freightos, a freight service provider, pointed out that China's measures do not yet have a major impact on freight shipping, but if this situation continues for a long time, it is likely to have a significant impact. If ships take an alternative route due to regional disputes, the flight schedule becomes more complicated and the time required for transportation increases, which may result in additional costs, he said. Despite opposition from local residents and the international community, Japan has decided to push ahead with the construction of a polluted water discharge facility in Fukushima, and it is predicted that the time to discharge the contaminated water will be next summer. The Nihon Keizai Shimbun reported on the 4th that Tokyo Electric Power, the operator of the Fukushima 1 nuclear power plant, will begin construction of facilities such as an undersea tunnel for the discharge of contaminated water on the same day and complete it in June next year. TEPCO plans to carry out work such as excavation of a subsea tunnel that extends from the nuclear power plant site to the sea offshore 1 kilometer away, and installation of piping connecting the storage tank to the subsea tunnel. The completion date that TEPCO has announced so far is in April next year, so it is expected that the discharge will take place in the spring of next year. However, as the construction is delayed, the release time is likely to be delayed. Nikkei said, the amount of contaminated water is reduced and the storage tank is expected to fill up in the fall of next year. Even if the discharge to the sea does not start in the spring of next year, an overflow of contaminated water can be avoided. At the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, about 130 to 150 tons of polluted water containing radioactive materials from groundwater and rainwater is generated every day. TEPCO cleans it with a multi-nuclide removal facility, ALPS, and stores it in a storage tank at the site of the nuclear power plant. However, TEPCO said that the storage tank was full and there was no more storage space, and that it would dilute the contaminated water to a 40th level before discharging it to the seabed. However, even if it is purified with APLs, radioactive material called tritium contained in the contaminated water is not filtered, so local fishermen's groups as well as the international community including Korea and China continue to criticize it. In the first half of this year, Korea's current account surplus fell by more than 40% from a year ago. In the first half of this year, when the trade balance has already turned into a deficit, the current account surplus has plummeted, raising concerns that the red light has turned on for economic growth. According to the Bank of Korea on the 5th, the current account accounted for $24.78 billion, about 32,169.4 billion won, in the first half of this year, down 40.7% from $41.76 billion a year ago. The current account represents the difference between the income and expenditure of a country by transacting goods and services with foreign countries. The fact that the current account and the trade account have both decreased means that Korea's income from foreign countries is decreasing. The current account consists of the balance of goods and services, wages, dividend income, and interest, and the transfer income balance. The goods account surplus in the first half of this year was $20.01 billion, down 47.9% from a year ago. Due to the nature of the Korean economy, where the manufacturing sector is heavily dependent on the manufacturing sector, if the product balance deteriorates, the economy may also be shaken. According to the Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy, the trade balance recorded a deficit of $10.3 billion in the first half of this year. The reason that the trade balance is in the red while the goods balance is in the surplus is due to the difference in the aggregation method between the two indicators. Both indicators show the difference between imports and exports, but the trade balance is based on the movement of goods and the balance of goods is based on the flow of money. The government is of the view that even if the trade balance is in the red, the situation is not cause for concern because the goods and current accounts are still in a surplus. However, Song Tae-yoon, a professor of economics at Yonsei University, pointed out, the fact that the upward trend of exports has been dampened despite the recent weakness in the value of the won and that domestic inflation pressure has increased due to the rise in import prices is a very negative factor for the economic recovery. The government drew out a knife at a public institution that had only grown in size without strengthening its internal structure. It is judged that it is unreasonable to continue business management without change while carrying about 600 trillion won in debt. Moreover, if public corporations that are operated by blood tax are operated negligently, the damage goes to the people. Accordingly, the government decided to reduce the number of jobs in the public sector that increased in the process of overcoming COVID-19 and change the employee remuneration system to focus on performance. It heralded intensive reform to break the so-called iron rice bowl. In addition, it was decided to improve the financial structure by selling unnecessary assets such as condos and golf memberships, and by reorganizing the shares of subsidiaries that are expected to lose investment. According to the Ministry of Strategy and Finance on the 6th, 350 public institutions designated this year must formulate a plan in line with the new Government Public Institution Innovation Guidelines within this month and submit it to each competent ministry. This plan is submitted to the Ministry of Strategy and Finance after being reviewed by the relevant ministries, and the Public Institution Innovation TF will undergo an adjustment procedure by October. After that, it will be decided sequentially by the Public Institution Steering Committee. The gist of the guidelines presented by the government is to reduce the amount of money spent on reorganizing the organization, manpower, and budget centered on the core functions of each institution. Accordingly, the organization and personnel adjustment will be completed by the end of December this year, and from next year, in principle, the number of employees judged to be excessive as a result of the work evaluation has been reduced. However, he pointed out that there are currently no plans for artificial restructuring or privatization targeting employees of public institutions. Remuneration guidelines for executives taking into account economic conditions, institutional financial performance, and overall remuneration level will be released in October. In the case of employee labor costs, it will be presented through the budget management guidelines for December, and it is decided to reflect the results of management evaluation and improvement in the treatment of civil servants. The current remuneration system, which is centered on the salary system, will also be reorganized to a job level that considers the difficulty and performance of the job. In addition, major current expenses such as business promotion expenses and domestic and foreign travel expenses that organizations can adjust themselves will be cut by more than 10% in the second half of this year alone. It also sells non-essential assets. These include land and buildings that are not related to the unique functions of the institution, and condominiums and golf memberships that are used for excessive welfare benefits. In addition, it plans to sell land, machinery, equipment, and materials that have not been used for more than 2 years, as well as lodgings and corporate housing that violate the operating standards. Shares in subsidiaries that are in a state of complete capital erosion or whose investment loss exceeds 50% are also liquidated. We also decided to look at net losses over the past 3 years to determine whether the investment will be recovered. The government plans to evaluate the appropriateness of the innovation plan for the active participation of public institutions and reflect it in the evaluation of government work. It was also decided to review additional incentives for excellent institutions. The reason the new government has taken steps to correct the negligent management of public corporations can be found in the recently deteriorated financial structure. As of last year, the debt of 350 public institutions stood at 583 trillion won, up 16.7% from 499.4 trillion won at the end of 2016. This means that the debt increased by the previous government alone reached 84 trillion won. On the other hand, as of last year, the per capita operating profit of public corporations was 15 million won, a sharp drop from 992 million won in 2017. During this period, the interest coverage ratio, interest expense divided by operating profit, also shrank from 2.7 to 0.1. If this number is less than 1, it means that the company has to pay back more interest than it has earned. In particular, KEPCO posted a record loss of 5.86.1 trillion won last year. The debt-to-equity ratio also increased significantly from 187.5% in 2020 to 223.2%, and this figure soared to 262% in the first quarter of this year. In general, when the debt-to-equity ratio exceeds 200%, the financial situation is considered unstable. As of the end of last year, major public companies with a debt ratio of 200% or higher were Korea Gas Corporation, 378.9%, Korail, 287.3%, Korea District Heating Corporation, 257.5%, Korea Midland Power, 247.5%, and Korea Land and Housing Corporation, 221.3%, etc. In addition, public resource corporations such as Korea National Oil Corporation, Korea Mine Reclamation Corporation, and Korea Coal Corporation are in a state of capital erosion. It is also pointed out that the government's innovation guidelines for public institutions are focused only on short-term cost reduction. In the current system, target values such as debt ratio are suggested through the mid- and long-term financial management plan, but the binding force is weak because there is no enforcement. Attention is focused on the actions of Choi Min-young, the second daughter of SK Group chairman Choi Tae-won. As a child of a large corporation, he drew attention by serving as a naval officer, this time out of the shadow of his family, and is known to be working as an unpaid advisor for an American startup. According to a business source on the 5th, Choi Min-young took on an advisory role at Dawn, a telemedicine startup in San Francisco, USA. Founded in 2019, Dawn is a company specializing in the treatment of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It is operating a membership service that remotely diagnoses ADHD, provides prescriptions, and even provides treatment counseling. Min-jong Choi conducts advisory activities in the form of talent donation on a part-time basis here. Choi Min-young joined SK Hynix in 2019 and worked in the Intra Department, an organization specializing in international trade and policy response. It is known that this year, he moved to the strategic part of SK Hynix's US corporation and worked on mergers and acquisitions and capital investment. However, Choi Min-young is said to have taken a leave of absence from SK Hynix. With this in mind, there is an interpretation that Choi Min-young had a high interest in startups, so he went to Dawn to gain related experience. Choi Min-young, who graduated from the Department of Business Administration at Peking University in China, was discharged as a lieutenant in the Navy in 2017 and became the center of attention. It was found that 815 cases of Jeon's transactions for new villas and multi-family houses in Seoul in the first half of this year were Kantong Jeons, where the ratio of Jeons to the sale price was over 90%. In particular, in the case of Gangseogu, Seoul, 1 out of 2 new villas traded is highly concerned about Kin Jeons. Kangtong Jeons refers to a case in which the price of Jeons is similar to or higher than the purchase price, so that it is difficult for the tenant to get the deposit back after the lease contract expires. In the real estate industry, if the Jeons price exceeds 80% of the sale price, the risk of Kin Jeons is high. By autonomous district, 370, 53.3%, of the total 694 Jeons transactions in Gangseogu were counted as tin cans. In particular, Hwagokdong accounted for 82.2% of Gangseogu's tin cans with 304 cases. Hwagokdong is one of the representative areas with many villas such as multifamily, single-family, and multifamily, and there are many villas around 10 stories high because of the height restriction due to the nearby Gimpo airport. As housing prices are lower than in other areas, it is considered a neighborhood with high demand among young people. After Gangseogu, Yangcheongu, 48.7%, Gwanak-gu, 48.4%, and Guro-gu, 36.8%, the ratio of tin can houses exceeded the Seoul average. Democratic Party lawmaker Lee Jae-myung's judicial risk is becoming a reality. In connection with allegations of misappropriation of his wife Kim Hye-kyung's corporate card, suspicion of paying attorney's fees, suspicion of preferential treatment for Daejeongdong development, and suspicion of donations to Songnam FC, the police are searching for and summoning key officials. The most recent case is the allegation of misappropriation of corporate cards. Person A, who was being investigated as a witness, made an extreme choice on July 26. People's Power, the ruling party, claimed that the mysterious death continues. This is because during the investigation related to the Daejeongdong case, Yoo Yoo-han-ki, former head of Songnam Urban Development Corporation's Development Business Division, and Kim Moon-ki, former director of Songnam Urban Development Corporation's Development Project 1, made the extreme choice, followed by the death of Mr. Lee, who was accused of paying attorney's fees, as well as this death. However, it was revealed that Mr. A worked as a driver for the Lee Jae-myung candidate's camp during the last presidential election. According to the political fund expenditures submitted to the Election Commission by Rep. Lee Jae-myung, he paid more than 15 million won to his spouse's driver for salary and activity expenses, but the recipient is listed as Mr. A. In response, Rep. Jae-myung Lee's representative denied a personal relationship with his wife, saying, "I did not drive Kim Hye-kyung's car, and I was in charge of driving another car that was driven in front of the car in which my spouse was riding." However, Mr. A admitted that he was driving at the camp. A subpoena investigation was also conducted on B, a key figure in the allegation of corporate card misappropriation. B, who worked as a special Grade 5 employee in the General Affairs Division of the Gyeonggi Provincial Office when Rep. Jae-myung Lee served as Gyeonggi governor, is suspected of acting as an assistant to Kim Hye-kyung. As B was summoned and investigated, the allegations of corporate card misappropriation have come to a close. In the case of the allegation of paying attorney's fees, the prosecution conducted a search and seizure with the law firm of Lee Tae-hyung, who was the attorney for Rep. Lee Jae-myung, and Song-bul. On August 2, the third search and seizure was carried out on the headquarters of Songban-gul, Yongsan-gu, Seoul. Song-bul is suspected of paying 2 billion won worth of convertible bonds to lawyer Tae Hye-yong Lee on behalf of lawmaker Lee Jae-myung for violating the Public Official Election Act. The allegation of preferential treatment for the development of Daejeongdong is undergoing a full re-investigation. As the investigation team changed drastically due to the appointment of the prosecution in June, the investigation is being conducted again from the initial stage of the Daejeongdong development project. Last year, the investigation team focused on suspicions of lobbying by the so-called Daejeongdong 4, including Kim Man-bi, the major shareholder of Washin Daewoo. However, the upper line of Songnam City and Songnam Urban Development Corporation was not touched. It is known that the changed investigation team is aiming for the suspicion of breach of trust by Rep. Lee Jae-myung, who was designated as the highest-ranking person. In fact, the 3rd Division of the Anti-Corruption Investigation of the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office summoned and investigated Lee Kong-gil, former CEO of C7, who was an early participant in the project. Former CEO Kong-gil Lee, who led the private development in 2009, was completely excluded from the Daejeongdong project as Rep. Jae-myung Lee took office as Songnam mayor and switched to a public-private joint development project. In an interview with Sisa Journal, former CEO Lee Kong-gil said, if Daejeongdong was to be developed by the private sector, the maximum profit would be only 340 billion won. At the time, Lee Jae-myung, the mayor at the time, gave 600 billion won to Washindaeyu, a private company, when the mayor changed it to a public-private joint development. The Democratic Party's presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung will not be able to escape the allegations of breach of trust. Gyeonggi Nambu Police Agency, which is investigating the Songnam FC sponsorship allegation, is said to be considering sending Rep. Jae-myung Lee to the prosecution on charges of violating the Act on Aggravated Punishment of Specific Crimes. In the Songnam FC donation case, Rep. Jae-myung Lee received preferential treatment from 6 companies including Dusan ENC, Naver, Hyundai Department Store, Bundangcha Hospital, Nongyeop, and Alpha Dome City in the name of Songnam FC advertising expenses from 2015 to 2017 while he was serving as Songnam mayor. Is suspected of giving. Rep. Lee Jae-myung is currently running for the Democratic Party's representative election. The Democratic National Convention will be held on August 28. The investigation into Rep. Jae-myung Lee is inevitably affecting the election of the party's representative. The number of people who signed a petition to revise the constitution of the Democratic Party of Korea, which automatically suspends the duties of watchers indicted by the prosecution on corruption charges, exceeded the 50,000 response threshold. This petition is also called the Lee Jae-myung Bulletproof Petition in that it aims to protect Rep. Jae-myung Lee, who is facing legal risks. According to the party petition system of the Democratic Party on the 5th, as of 3 p.m. on the same day, more than 60,000 party members had agreed to the petition to revise Article 80 of the party constitution. Article 80 of the Democratic Party constitution stipulates that the duties of a member of the party charged with corruption must be suspended at the same time as the prosecution. In response, the petitioner said, now that the Yoon Suk-yeol administration is becoming a dictatorship of the prosecution, indiscriminate prosecution against the opposition Democratic Party lawmakers can proceed. Within the party, there was a response saying, isn't this a Save Lee Jae-myung style petition that is likely to win the party's president? Rep. Jae-myung Lee is being investigated in connection with allegations of the Daejeongdong Development Project, payment of attorney's fees, and misappropriation of corporate cards. If the petition is accepted and the party constitution is amended, there will be grounds for Rep. Jae-myung Lee to maintain his position as party leader even if he is prosecuted by the prosecution. The Democratic Party established a petition system on the 1st with the purpose of establishing a communication channel with party members. The right party member who has paid the party fee can petition and consent. The party is obliged to respond to petitions that have more than 50,000 signatures. As of 9 p.m. on the 5th, more than 100,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19 across the country had been reported. According to the tally of each local government, including the Seoul Metropolitan Government, 107,807 people tested positive for COVID-19 in 17 cities and provinces across the country from midnight to 9 p.m. on the same day. Although 583 fewer than the 108,390 total for the same time period the previous day, the number of interim confirmed cases exceeded 100,000 for 5 days in a row. On the 29th of last month, a week ago, the number increased 1.37 times from 78,743, and 1.63 times from 65,972 on the 22nd of last month, 2 weeks before. As there is still time until midnight, the number of new confirmed cases announced on the 6th is expected to record around 110,000. If you look at the new confirmed cases by region, 54,722, 50.8%, in the metropolitan area and 53,085, 49.2%, in the non-metropolitan area. The shipment of products was virtually halted as the Haijinro beer factory, located in Hongcheon, Gangwon-do, was occupied by the Freight Solidarity of the Public Transport Workers Union of the National Democratic Trade Union Confederation for the third day. About 200 members of the Cargo Solidarity protested on the 2nd by mobilizing 20 trucks to block the entrance to the Haijinro Gangwon factory. They are known to demand a 30% increase in freight rates, payment of transportation fees for holiday work, and vehicle advertisement and car wash costs from Haijinro subcontractors. A Haijinro official said on the 5th, from the 2nd to the 3rd, when the demonstration started, the vehicle loaded with goods could not leave the factory. He said, with the police's efforts to disband, the road was secured around noon on the 4th, and shipments resumed. Haight Jinro Gangwon plant accounts for half of Haight beer production, and the average daily output is 110,000 cases, or about 2.2 million bottles. On the other hand, there was an accident in which some union members fell under the bridge that was occupied during the demonstration. According to the police on the 4th, 5 union members jumped off the bridge while the police were dispatched and dispersed the union members around 10 a.m. They were all rescued by the 119 water rescue team on standby at the scene. One of the new members was taken to the hospital. On the 4th, the police dispatched about 1,000 people from 12 squadrons to disperse the union members who were protesting on the bridge, which is the entrance to the factory, and tow some of the trucks. As a result, vehicle traffic was allowed from the morning, and shipments were partially resumed. In Seoul, a foreign man threw a large amount of cash on the street and reported the loss to the police directly. According to the police on the 5th, on the afternoon of the afternoon before, on a street in a residential area in Songgaidong, Iraqi citizen A in his 30s scattered foreign currency such as dollars and euros and Korean won bills on the roadside worth 22 million won. At that time, Mr. A was said to have handed money to another passerby who had never met him, saying, "I have a lot of money," but when the other person did not receive it, he began to sprinkle banknotes around. Mr. A, who left the scene immediately after he sprinkled the money, later reported to the police that he had lost the money. The police took protection of Mr. A to the nearby police district and conducted an investigation, but he understood that there were no special crimes. A simple test to check for drug use also came out negative. All the cash sprayed by A was also collected at the scene. A police official said, "We are looking for a guardian to take over as we have determined that Mr. A is mentally unstable." After the Ministry of Education announced the policy to abolish foreign language high schools, they criticized the parents for unilaterally making the announcement without public discussion, and called for the withdrawal of the policy and the resignation of Deputy Prime Minister Park Sun-ae. On the 5th, the National Association of Foreign Language High School Parents held a press conference in front of the National Assembly and said, "A unilateral announcement by the Minister of Education without a discussion or public hearing is a hasty administration. Please present a reasonable reason that students and parents can understand." Education Minister Park Sun-ae, who announced the Parents Association said, "We are concerned about the behavior of the education authorities that drive public opinion to one side without any public discussion process in which schools, students, and parents, who are the main agents of educational operation and participate. He pointed out, the behavior of trying to solve important issues in a dichotomous way with only political logic at the forefront can only be understood because the current government is dealing with this issue from a political point of view rather than education. The Parents Association said, "Instead of studying abroad or going to an international school, which costs a lot of money, it is difficult to calculate the value of foreign language high schools' unique capabilities and know-how that can develop an international sense, including learning foreign languages and humanities, within the framework of our public education. The preservation of foreign high schools that nurture future talents in the global era is essential for enhancing international competitiveness," he said. The Parent Association said, "If the cause of maintaining science high schools, gifted schools, and private high schools is to satisfy the educational autonomy and diversity of students and parents, the preservation of foreign high schools and international high schools must also be guaranteed to maintain policy consistency. We must immediately withdraw the policy of abolition of foreign high schools and come to the dialogue with the least sincerity." The Ministry of Education announced in its work report on the 29th of last month that it would reorganize the high school system in such a way that autonomous private high schools were retained but foreign high schools were converted to general high schools. A detailed plan for high school system reform including these contents will be prepared by the end of the year and will be finalized in the first half of next year. Over the weekend, with high temperatures, the heat is rampant, and showers are expected across the country, including the metropolitan area. Be careful as there may be gusts of wind, thunder, and lightning along with rain. According to the Korea Meteorological Administration on the 5th, it is expected that there will be a lot of clouds across the country on the 6th, and showers are expected in most areas. In the Seoul metropolitan area, Gangwon-do, and northern Chungcheong, it will rain from morning to night on the 6th, and from the morning to afternoon in southern Chungcheong and southern regions and Jeju-do. Expected precipitation is 5 to 60 millimeters. The lowest temperature in the morning on the 6th was predicted to be 24 to 28 degrees, and the highest temperature in the daytime was predicted to be 30 to 37 degrees. With a heat wave warning in effect across the country recently, the maximum temperature will rise from 33 to 37 degrees for the time being, and it will be very hot. Thank you for watching today. Please click subscribe and like.